The Ohio River moves differently in Kentucky than it does anywhere else along its 981-mile journey. Here, where it curves through the northern edge of the state, separating Kentucky from Indiana, the water takes on a particular quality: murky, brown-green, heavy with sediment and secrets, moving with a deceptive laziness that belies the current's strength. In the autumn of 1987, that river reflected the changing leaves in fractured images, maple reds and oak golds breaking apart on its surface like stained glass windows shattered and reassembled by the water's motion. Newport, Kentucky, in October 1987, existed in a strange temporal space, not quite the city it would become, no longer the town it had been. Situated directly across the river from Cincinnati, connected by 3 bridges that carried a constant stream of traffic between Ohio and Kentucky, Newport was a place of transition. The old gambling joints and clubs from the city's notorious past were mostly gone, shut down in the cleanup efforts of the 60s and 70s. But the bones of that history remained: buildings with bricked-over windows, stories passed down about mob connections and corrupt police, a reputation that clung to the town like morning fog to the riverbank. By 1987, Newport was trying to be respectable. Young families were moving into the Victorian houses along the hillsides. Small businesses were opening on Monmouth Street. The schools were decent. The crime rate had dropped. But the river remained constant, a physical and psychological boundary, a reminder that some things about Newport would never fully wash clean. The weather that October was unusually warm, an Indian summer that extended well past its expected farewell. Temperatures in the mid-70s during the day, cooling to the 50s at night. The kind of weather that made people linger outdoors, reluctant to surrender to the winter they knew was coming. The leaves were at their peak. The hillsides above Newport a tapestry of colors that tourists drove hours to see. At twilight, when the sun dropped behind the Cincinnati skyline and cast the river in shades of amber and bronze, the city looked almost magical, like a place where nothing bad could happen, like a place where families could put down roots and grow. Jennifer Marie Holland was 17 that autumn, a senior at Newport High School with college applications spread across her bedroom desk and a future that seemed to stretch before her like an open road. She had her father's blonde hair, thick and wavy, usually pulled back in a scrunchie during the school day, worn down in the evenings when she worked her shift at the Frisch's Big Boy on Route 9. She had her mother's blue eyes, the kind that looked gray in certain lights, and a smile that came easily, that made customers at the restaurant leave bigger tips and made her friends gravitate toward her in the cafeteria. Jennifer was methodical about her future. She'd filled out 7 college applications: University of Kentucky, Northern Kentucky University, Miami University across the river in Ohio, and 4 backups she privately thought she wouldn't need. She wanted to study elementary education, wanted to be a teacher like her Aunt Carol who taught 3rd grade in Covington. She'd calculated her GPA down to the decimal point, 3.7, not valedictorian material, but solid, respectable, good enough for scholarships when combined with her ACT score of 28. She worked 20 hours a week at Frisch's, saving money for textbooks and dorm furniture, building a fund she'd labeled in her notebook Future Jennifer. The Hollands lived on East 5th Street, a narrow road that climbed the hillside away from the river, lined with houses built in the 1920s. Narrow, tall, squeezed close together with tiny yards and steep steps up to the front doors. Their house was painted pale blue with white trim, distinguishable by the flower boxes Margaret Holland kept filled with whatever was in season. Mums in the fall, their rust and gold colors echoing the trees. Douglas Holland worked at the Bavarian Brewery, had for 22 years. A steady job that paid the bills and provided health insurance and didn't require college, which was why he was so proud Jennifer would be the first in their family to get a degree. Jennifer's younger sister, Amy, was 14, and looked up to Jennifer with the particular intensity of younger siblings who see their older brothers or sisters as roadmaps for their own futures. Amy played clarinet in the school band, wore Jennifer's hand-me-down clothes with pride, and spent hours in Jennifer's room talking about boys and music and whether they'd ever leave Kentucky or always come back. On the evening of October 23, 1987, a Friday that felt more like September than late October, Jennifer finished her shift at Frisch's at 9 p.m. Her manager, Dale Peterson, remembered her clocking out at 9:04, remembered her counting her tips, $47.80, a good night, and tucking the bills into her purse. She'd worked the dinner rush, serving endless plates of big boy burgers and fries to families and couples and teenagers like herself who came in after football games or before movies. Her friend, Melissa Combs, had driven them both to work that day in her mother's Oldsmobile, had picked Jennifer up at 3 p.m. as planned. But after the shift, their plans diverged. Melissa had a date, Brian, somebody from Bellevue High, and Jennifer had been fine with that, had told her to go, have fun, not to worry. Jennifer would get a ride home. Her house was less than 2 miles from Frisch's. She'd done it before. No big deal. Several co-workers offered her rides. Dale said he'd drive her after he closed up at 10. Jamie Morrison, another server who lived in Bellevue, said she could swing by Newport. It wasn't out of her way. But Jennifer declined both offers. She had a ride arranged, she said. Someone was picking her up. She'd be fine. According to witnesses, Dale Peterson and the night dishwasher, Curtis Bell, Jennifer stood outside the front entrance of Frisch's for approximately 10 minutes. They saw her through the plate glass windows, standing under the light of the big boy statue with its red and white checkered overalls, purse over her shoulder, looking down the road like she was waiting for someone. Dale had called out, "You sure you don't need a ride?" And Jennifer had waved him off, smiled, said, "I'm good, he should be here any minute." He should be here any minute. At 9:15 p.m., a vehicle pulled into the parking lot. Dale noticed it because he was watching Jennifer, feeling vaguely paternal and protective. It was a dark sedan. He thought maybe a Chevrolet, couldn't be sure. Didn't pay that much attention because Jennifer clearly knew the driver. She'd walked toward the car, gotten in the passenger side, and the vehicle had pulled back onto Route 9, heading south toward Newport's downtown. Dale had gone back to closing procedures. Curtis had finished the dishes. By 9:45, the restaurant was locked and they'd both driven home, tired from the Friday rush, thinking nothing more about Jennifer Holland except maybe that she was a good kid, a hard worker, would probably make something of herself. By 10:30 p.m., when Jennifer hadn't arrived home and Margaret Holland's mild concern was beginning to crystallize into something sharper, the October night had cooled considerably. The temperature had dropped to 53 degrees. The stars were obscured by clouds moving in from the west. The river, if you stood close enough to hear it, whispered against the banks in its eternal, indifferent rhythm. By 11 p.m., Margaret had called Melissa Combs, interrupting her date. Melissa had come home immediately, told Margaret that Jennifer said she had a ride, that she'd seemed fine when Melissa left at 6. By 11:30, Douglas had driven to Frisch's, found it dark and locked, drove up and down Route 9 looking for, he didn't know what. His daughter walking along the road? The car that had picked her up, broken down somewhere? By midnight, they'd called everyone they could think of. Amy sat on the stairs, watching her parents' faces, seeing her own future dissolving in real time. If something could happen to Jennifer, capable, careful Jennifer, then nothing was safe. At 12:47 a.m., Douglas Holland called the Newport Police Department and reported his daughter missing. And somewhere in the darkness, somewhere between the restaurant's parking lot and the house on East 5th Street, Jennifer Marie Holland had vanished as completely as if the river itself had reached up and pulled her under. The incident. The Newport Police Department in 1987 occupied a brick building on York Street, 2 blocks from the river, a structure that had served as the city's police headquarters since 1952. Sergeant Thomas Keene took Douglas Holland's call with the practiced calm of someone who'd fielded hundreds of missing person reports, 90% of which resolved themselves within 24 hours. Teenage girl didn't come home from work, last seen getting into a car she apparently knew. Probably went to a party. Probably lost track of time. Probably fine. But Keene was professional enough to take it seriously anyway. He dispatched Officer Rebecca Torres and Officer Michael Flynn to the Holland residence to take a formal statement. They arrived at 1:15 a.m., found the family in the living room, mother crying quietly, father pacing, younger daughter pale and silent on the sofa. Torres took the lead. What was Jennifer wearing? Blue jeans, white Frisch's polo shirt, white sneakers, denim jacket. What did she have with her? Her purse, brown leather shoulder bag, contained her wallet, maybe $20 in addition to her tips, her school ID, a lipstick, keys to the house, any identifying marks, jewelry, a small gold hoop earrings, a class ring from Newport High, a Timex watch with a leather band. Who had she been with? According to Melissa Combs, nobody. She'd been alone when Melissa left, but she'd told coworkers someone was picking her up. Who? The parents didn't know. Margaret's voice broke when she said, "I don't know who she was seeing. I don't know if she was seeing anyone. She didn't tell me." That detail, the mysterious driver, the unnamed he Jennifer had been waiting for, would become central to everything that followed. Torres and Flynn drove to Frisch's at 2 a.m. Dale Peterson's home number was on file. They woke him up, asked him to come open the restaurant, answer questions. He arrived at 2:30, still groggy, wearing sweatpants and a Reds t-shirt. He confirmed Jennifer's departure time, confirmed she'd been waiting for someone, confirmed he'd seen her get into a dark sedan. Make? Model? Year? He couldn't say. It had been dark. He'd only glanced at it. Definitely a sedan. Definitely dark. Black or dark blue or dark green. Kentucky plates, he thought, but couldn't swear to it. They asked about Jennifer's demeanor. Had she seemed upset? Scared? Nervous? No, Dale said. Normal. Maybe a little excited. Like she was looking forward to something, but nothing that set off alarms. Who might she have been meeting? Did she have a boyfriend? Dale didn't think so. Jennifer was friendly with everyone, but didn't date much, not that he knew of. Focused on school, on saving money for college, mature for her age, responsible. Responsible girls don't vanish, Torres thought, but didn't say. By 3 a.m., the first real search had begun. Patrol cars driving every street between Frisch's and the Holland home, officers with flashlights checking alleys, parks, parking lots. Looking for what? A girl walking, a crashed car, a body. They found nothing. At dawn on October 24th, as gray light seeped over the river and illuminated Newport in shades of pewter and ash, the case was elevated. Detective Carl Winters, a 20-year veteran of the department, took over the investigation. He arrived at the station at 7 a.m., already briefed on the basics. 17-year-old girl, good kid, no history of running away, missing since approximately 9:15 the previous night, last seen getting into an unidentified vehicle with an unknown driver. Winter's first move was to organize a proper canvass. Every business along Route 9, every house within a 2-mile radius of Frisch's, every person who might have been out Friday evening. Knock on doors, ask questions. Did you see anything? A girl standing outside Frisch's? A dark sedan? Anything unusual? The responses were frustratingly consistent. No, sorry. Didn't see anything. Wasn't out that night. Wish I could help. By noon, the story was on the local news. WLWT Channel 5 in Cincinnati ran a segment. Newport teen missing after work shift. Jennifer's senior photo filled the screen. Her blonde hair curled and sprayed in that quintessentially 1987 style, her smile bright, her eyes looking directly at the camera as if asking viewers personally for help. The volunteer response was immediate. By 2 p.m., more than 100 people had gathered at Newport High School, offering to search. Teachers who'd had Jennifer in class, classmates who sat near her at lunch, parents who didn't know her but had daughters the same age and couldn't not help. Detective Winters organized them into teams, searched the riverbank, the parks, the wooded areas on the hillsides, the empty buildings downtown. Look for anything: clothing, a purse, signs of struggle, disturbed ground. They searched Saturday. They searched Sunday. They found nothing. The Ohio River was dragged in the areas closest to Jennifer's last known location. Divers from the Cincinnati Fire Department went down into the murky water, visibility near zero, feeling along the muddy bottom for anything that might be a body. They found shopping carts, tires, a rusted bicycle, debris that had accumulated over decades. No Jennifer. By Monday, October 26, 3 days missing, the case had expanded beyond Newport. The FBI field office in Cincinnati was contacted. Special Agent Thomas Bauer, who specialized in missing persons and suspected abductions, joined the investigation. The reach widened. Appeals on Cincinnati television stations, in the Kentucky Post newspaper, on radio stations across northern Kentucky and southern Ohio. The tips poured in. Someone thought they'd seen Jennifer at a gas station in Covington. Someone else saw a girl matching her description in Cincinnati's Over-the-Rhine neighborhood. A psychic from Columbus called with visions of water and darkness. Each tip was followed, investigated, dismissed. Detective Winters focused on the unknown driver. Who was picking Jennifer up? Margaret and Douglas swore they didn't know. Amy, in tears, said Jennifer had never mentioned a boyfriend, never snuck out, never seemed secretive. But teenagers kept secrets, Winters knew. Even good teenagers kept secrets. He interviewed Jennifer's friends systematically. Melissa Combs. She didn't have a boyfriend. I mean, she thought some guys were cute, but she wasn't dating anyone. She was too focused on college. Rachel Brennan, another close friend. Jennifer was like super responsible. She wouldn't get in a car with a stranger, so whoever picked her up, she knew him. Brian Mills, a classmate. A lot of guys liked Jennifer, but she kind of kept everyone at arm's length. I don't know of anyone she was seeing. The phrase "she knew him" kept recurring. Jennifer wasn't reckless. She'd gotten into that car willingly, which meant she'd trusted the driver, which meant he was someone from her life, someone she worked with, someone from school, someone from the neighborhood, someone. But who? Winters looked at Dale Peterson with extra scrutiny, the manager, older, in a position of authority. But Dale's alibi was solid. He'd been at Frisch's until 9:45, then driven directly home where his wife confirmed his arrival at 10:05. The timeline didn't work. He looked at teachers from Newport High. Any inappropriate relationships? Any complaints? Nothing surfaced. He looked at neighbors, family friends, co-workers, interviewed every male who'd had contact with Jennifer in the weeks before her disappearance. Built a list of names, alibis, eliminations. The first week became the second. October aged toward November. The warm weather broke finally. Temperatures dropping into the 40s. Rain moving in to turn the fallen leaves into a slick carpet of decay. The volunteer searches dwindled as the weather worsened and hope faded. Margaret Holland stopped sleeping. She'd sit in Jennifer's room for hours, touching her daughter's things. The college applications, half filled out, that would never be sent. The clothes hanging in the closet, organized by color, that would never be worn. The books on the shelf, their spines creased from rereading, that would never be opened again. She'd lie on Jennifer's bed and breathe in the fading scent of her daughter's shampoo on the pillowcase, trying to hold on to something that was already becoming ghost-like. Douglas returned to work at the brewery because not working meant drowning in helplessness. But he was only physically present. His mind was always elsewhere, always replaying that Friday night, always asking himself why he hadn't driven to Frisch's to pick her up, why he'd assumed she was fine, why he'd failed the most basic job of a father, keeping his child safe. Amy stopped playing clarinet, stopped doing homework, sat in her classes staring at nothing, came home to a house that felt like a mausoleum, avoided Jennifer's room because entering it made the absence too real. By the third week, Detective Winters had exhausted most of his immediate leads. The FBI had processed the case through their databases, looking for similar abductions, patterns, known offenders. They'd found nothing definitive. Agent Bauer gave the assessment Winters already knew. Without a body, without the car, without knowing who picked her up, we're working blind. Someone knows something. Someone saw something. But either they don't realize what they saw, or they're not talking. On November 12th, 19 days after Jennifer's disappearance, a hunter found clothing in the woods 3 miles south of Newport, near the rural edge of Campbell County. Blue jeans, a white polo shirt with a Frisch's logo, white sneakers, a denim jacket. The items were identified as Jennifer's within hours, but they weren't discarded carelessly. They were folded, placed in a neat pile under a tree, arranged almost reverently, as if whoever had left them wanted them to be found, but also wanted to show what? Respect? Control? Some message that investigators couldn't quite decipher. More disturbing, the clothing showed no signs of damage, no tears, no stains, no blood. Just Jennifer's clothes removed and folded and left in the woods like an offering or a marker. The area was searched intensively. Cadaver dogs were brought in. The woods were combed grid by grid. Nothing else was found. No purse, no jewelry, no body. Just clothes, folded and waiting in the quiet darkness of the woods, speaking a language no one could understand. The search, investigation. The discovery of Jennifer's clothing transformed the case from a missing person investigation into a likely homicide. The media coverage intensified. The Cincinnati Enquirer ran a front-page story. Missing teen's clothes found, foul play suspected. Television stations broadcast nightly updates. Jennifer's face became familiar to hundreds of thousands of people across Ohio and Kentucky. The pretty blonde girl with the bright smile, the girl who'd had a future and then didn't. Detective Winters established a command post at the Newport Police Department, walls covered with maps showing the geography of the case. Frisch's Big Boy on Route 9 marked with a red pin. The Holland home on East 5th Street marked with blue. The location where the clothing was found marked with black. He drew lines connecting them, calculated distances, studied the terrain, trying to understand the logic of the perpetrator. The folded clothing haunted him. In 20 years of police work, he'd never seen anything quite like it. Killers, and by now Winters was certain Jennifer had been killed, though he'd never say it in front of her family, typically discarded evidence carelessly in a panic, wanting to distance themselves from it as quickly as possible. But this was different. This was deliberate. This was someone taking time, exerting control, making choices. What kind of person folds a victim's clothing? Dr. Ellen Morrison, a forensic psychologist brought in as a consultant by the FBI, provided a profile. This is someone organized, methodical. The folding suggests ritualistic behavior, possibly a need for order or a compulsion to demonstrate respect, even within the context of violence. This person likely has relationships, holds a job, functions in society without raising red flags. He's not a disorganized offender acting on impulse. He planned this. The profile was simultaneously helpful and terrifying, because it meant Jennifer's killer wasn't some obvious monster lurking on the margins. He was someone integrated into the community, someone who might be helping with the search, attending the vigils, expressing concern and sympathy while secretly knowing exactly what had happened to Jennifer Holland. The investigation expanded in multiple directions. Forensic teams processed Jennifer's clothing, looking for transfer evidence, hairs, fibers, biological material. The technology in 1987 was limited compared to what would come later, but they found something. Several synthetic fibers on the jeans, dark blue or black, consistent with automotive carpet or upholstery. Confirmation that Jennifer had been in a vehicle, lying down or sitting on the floor, but the fibers were too common to trace to a specific make or model. They also found trace DNA on the inside collar of the polo shirt, saliva, as if someone had put their mouth near her neck. The sample was collected and stored, but in 1987, DNA technology was still in its infancy. PCR amplification wouldn't become standard in forensic labs for several more years. The sample existed, but it couldn't tell them anything immediately useful. Winters intensified the interviews, going back to everyone who'd been questioned before, pushing harder. Someone knew something. Someone had seen something. The statistical probability that Jennifer had been abducted and murdered by a complete stranger with no connection to her life was low. Killers usually know their victims, or at least exist in overlapping circles. He re-interviewed co-workers from Frisch's, pressed them on whether Jennifer had mentioned anyone bothering her, any uncomfortable interactions, any customer who'd paid too much attention. Nothing solid emerged, just vague memories of regulars who were maybe a bit too friendly, but nothing that rose to the level of suspicious. He looked again at Jennifer's personal life. Her diary, kept sporadically in a notebook hidden in her desk drawer, revealed a typical teenage inner world. Stress about grades, frustration with Amy for borrowing her things without asking, excitement about college, crushes on boys she never talked to. One entry from September 15th read, "Sometimes I feel like everyone is watching me, waiting for me to screw up. I just want to be good enough, you know? To make everyone proud. No mentions of a boyfriend. No hints of secret meetings. Just a 17-year-old girl trying to navigate the ordinary pressures of senior year." The community maintained its vigil. Every Sunday, a group gathered at Newport High School for a prayer service for Jennifer. Margaret and Douglas attended everyone, standing side by side, holding hands, their faces growing more haunted with each passing week. People brought flowers, candles, photographs. Someone made a banner that read, "Bring Jennifer Home," which hung in the gymnasium throughout the winter. But as November became December, and December became January 1988, the energy faded. Not the love or concern that remained, but the active hope. People stopped expecting good news. The searches stopped. The daily volunteers dwindled. Life demanded forward motion even when hearts wanted to stay suspended in October, waiting for Jennifer to come home. The Ohio River froze partially that winter, ice forming along the banks, unusual for that region. Margaret would walk down to the riverfront park and stand watching the ice, wondering if Jennifer was under there somewhere, trapped in the cold and dark. Douglas discouraged these walks, worried about her state of mind. But how do you tell a mother not to look for her missing child? Agent Bauer returned to Cincinnati, leaving the case in local hands, but promising to stay involved. Detective Winters continued working it obsessively, even as new cases demanded attention, even as the brass suggested he might be too close, too invested, should maybe step back. He refused. This was his case. Jennifer was his responsibility. In March 1988, a potential break emerged. A man named Richard Holcomb, living in Louisville, was arrested for the assault of a young woman he'd picked up outside her workplace. During his interrogation, he mentioned knowing about other girls, about situations in northern Kentucky. Winters drove to Louisville immediately, interviewed Holcomb for 6 hours. But it led nowhere. Holcomb was in prison in Indiana on October 23, 1987. His alibis for Jennifer's disappearance were ironclad, and his knowledge of northern Kentucky cases came from newspaper articles he'd read, not personal experience. Another dead end. The years accumulated slowly. 1988 became 1989. The Berlin Wall fell, the world changed, but in Newport, Jennifer's absence remained the defining fact of certain lives. Margaret Holland aged a decade in 2 years, her hair going gray, her face developing lines that hadn't been there before. Douglas moved through life like an automaton, performing the necessary functions, but existing somewhere else entirely. Amy graduated high school in 1991, left for college at University of Kentucky, creating physical distance from the grief that saturated her childhood home. Detective Winters retired in 1995, but he took copies of Jennifer's case file with him, kept working it on his own time, couldn't let it go. He'd wake at 3 a.m. and review witness statements, looking for inconsistencies, connections he'd missed. He attended conferences on cold case investigations, learning new techniques, new approaches. But without new evidence, there was only so much revisiting old ground could accomplish. The case went cold officially, but never fully. It remained open, a file that new detectives would occasionally pull and review, shaking their heads at the lack of resolution. Jennifer's face stayed on the missing persons board at the police station until 2003, when the board was replaced with a digital system and her photo moved to a database that fewer people saw. Newport changed around her absence. The riverfront was redeveloped in the early 2000s. The Newport Aquarium opened, restaurants and entertainment venues appeared, the city rebranded itself as a destination. The old haunts of Jennifer's youth were demolished or repurposed. Frisch's Big Boy closed in 1999, the building later becoming a tire shop. The Victoria Theater, where Jennifer had seen movies, was renovated. East 5th Street saw property values rise as young professionals discovered Newport's Victorian architecture. But on a certain hillside, a pale blue house remained, occupied by 2 people who'd grown old waiting. Margaret still walked to the end of the street most mornings, looked toward the hills where Jennifer's clothes had been found, and wondered. Douglas, retired from the brewery, spent hours in a basement workshop building nothing in particular, just moving his hands to keep his mind from spiraling. The dogwood tree they'd planted in the backyard in Jennifer's memory grew tall and strong, blooming white every spring with a persistence that felt both comforting and cruel. Life continued, but it continued wrong, off-kilter, missing an essential piece that had been there and then wasn't. 20 years passed, then 30, and then, in the spring of 2018, something shifted. The turning point. Detective Sarah Brennan was 34 years old when she took over the Newport Police Department's cold case unit in January 2018. The unit consisted of her, 1 desk, and approximately 200 unsolved cases dating back to 1962. She'd requested the position specifically, felt called to it in a way she couldn't quite articulate. While her colleagues chased active investigations, she wanted to speak for the dead, to reach back through time and find answers that had eluded previous generations of investigators. Jennifer Holland's case caught her attention immediately, not just because it was tragic, they were all tragic, but because of details that felt off. The folded clothing, the careful placement in the woods, the unknown driver who'd never been identified, the complete absence of Jennifer's body despite extensive searches. It read like someone who'd been confident enough to engage with police, to watch the investigation unfold, possibly even to participate in the searches. Brennan spent weeks reading every document in the case file, every interview transcript, every tip that had been called in and investigated. She created a timeline on her office wall, mapping Jennifer's last day minute by minute. She drove the route from Frisch's to the Holland home, timed it, studied the geography. She visited the location where the clothing had been found, now overgrown and forgotten, barely recognizable as a crime scene from 30 years